Now that we've got to this stage, we'll continue to look further at ways to improve our project, and in particular by considering something that you'll no doubt find extremely useful called ripple deletion. First, to help explain or illustrate what the ripple delete function is within our project, it's worth thinking back to when we looked at deleting events from the timeline. I'm sure you'll remember that deleting an event, as we'd expect, removes the selected event, leaving the original space it held on the timeline blank. I'll illustrate what I mean. I'll place 3 of our music videos onto the timeline. Now at the moment, for this example, I'm not particularly concerned that these 3 clips won't form the finished video in this particular order or edited state. I'm just showing you this as an example. So there's our first clip, and now I'll drag number 2 there also. And to finish for this example, we will need a 3rd video to follow. Okay, all fairly straightforward. And if I click along the timeline here, moving the CTI along, then you'll see these 3 distinct events. Okay then, before I illustrate the ripple delete function, I'll go through the deletion process so that you can see why I like this ripple delete function. So now if I select the middle event, event number 2, and then hit delete on my keyboard, then of course this event is removed, and in its place we are left with nothing, as we would expect by hitting the delete key. Well, there is nothing there, just the area that event number 2 was originally placed in. And if this was a real project, at this point, if I want to close this resulting gap by left-clicking and dragging what was event number 3, but is now event number 2, so that it meets the end of event number 1, well, that's easy enough to achieve and only takes a second to do it, because there is, after all, only this one event to move. However, picture this everyday editing situation with a complex project. If you had another 40 events, for example, on the timeline, and you had to move all those one by one, it would get quite tedious. And that's where using the Vegas Pro 12 ripple delete function comes into its own, in that it will save quite a considerable amount of editing time. What ripple deletion allows is it lets us select a timeline event, or more than one event, and delete it, whilst also automatically closing up the gap left on the timeline that was originally inhabited by the event until a few moments ago. Okay, that's the theory. I'll run up here and hit the undo button a couple of times to go back to where we were. So now I'll quickly illustrate how ripple deletion works in practice. Just before I do though, let me explain there are many occasions you will use this ripple deletion function, including when you trim events, when you compress or stretch an event, when you cut, paste, or indeed delete an event. For now though, we'll look at when we delete an event only, but the principle holds true for all those different options I've just mentioned. So I'll select the middle event once again and hit delete. Well, you might be asking what's changed. Well, nothing just yet, because I'm going to first show you the manual method of ripple deleting, and then the automatic method of ripple deleting. Okay, so now with our event deleted from the timeline, and the resulting hole in the sequence now displaying, I can perform a manual ripple delete. And I do it by going up to Edit initially, and then down to this option here, Post Edit Ripple, and I can choose a relevant option from here. Now, because this is only on one track, i.e. one video and one embedded audio track, I'll choose the first option there at the top, Affected Tracks, but do note the other options too. So by clicking there, our newly created vacant space is removed, and the following event moves into that area. And of course now we'll appreciate this is a great time saver if there were 20 further following events, because they would all move too along the timeline. I concede you won't always want to do this, especially if you are editing out sections you don't want, but do want the vacated range to remain intact, ready for a suitable substitute event to take its place. But if you're like me, then I'm sure you'll find many occasions whereby you do want to remove a whole event, or section, or ranged area, so that no hole is left in the timeline playback. Okay, so that's the manual ripple delete function for when you want to perform a post-edit ripple delete. But if I want to do this automatically, this is possible also. First, I'll hit undo a couple of times again to go back to where we were. So now once more, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the ripple delete function, but this time in automatic mode rather than in manual mode. Firstly then, I need to select the middle event once more, and I'm going to hit delete in a moment, but before I do, I want to action a ripple delete again. But this time I want the ripple delete to be automatic, as I've said. So to do this, see this button up here? This is the auto ripple button, and you'll notice next to it is the drop reveal arrow. So I'll click on there, and I'm going to choose the option I require from these three again. Now I'm going to go for affected tracks again, so I'll leave it checked there, because that will ripple delete on just this one track. And therefore now with my event selected, I'll just make sure the auto ripple button is engaged, and then hitting delete on my keyboard, well, we instantly see the ripple delete is actioned automatically, removing that event, and the normally resulting gap is simultaneously removed too. Okay, so that's a run through ripple deleting and how it can help us speed up our workflow, both manually and automatically.